What's up, everyone? I'm here in Orange Gate Park, going on a little walk this morning, and also looking for my friend Urtica eroica, also known as stinging nettle, a delicious, tasty, wild edible plant. If you are looking for something to do, going nettle harvesting is a great thing to do right now here in early April. Nettles are up and about from our late February through early April. They're looking really good right now, so I'm going to show you what they're all about, how to harvest them, and how to cook and eat them as well. Let's go.
So before I send you outside, let's go over a couple foraging rules. So whenever you're out looking for plants, you want to make sure you know exactly what you're looking for because you don't want to be picking things that you can't fully identify. So when foraging, you want to start with things that are really, really easy to identify, and stinging nettles is one of those plants. It has a very distinct growth habit and leaf shape, and it stings you. So you are pretty darn sure what stinging nettle is when you're looking for it and harvesting it. So you do want to only harvest something if you are 100% sure you can ID it. Nettles is not one of these plants, but there are wild edible plants that you can eat and use as medicine that have some dangerous lookalikes that are poisonous. One rule for being respectful to the space is you never want to take the first plant you see and you never want to take the last. Harvesting the first or last plant can result in that plant not reproducing the next year. So if you're in a space where there's a ton of different nettle plants, if you harvest like a third of what you see, there's still a lot of plants to reproduce. However, if you harvested all of them or you found just like one or two plants and you harvested both of those, it is unlikely that those plants will be able to reproduce the following year, which means you've basically taken a food source away from that habitat and the other species that live there and yourself. So you want to always remember you're a guest in these ecosystems. This isn't your space, so you really need to be respectful. And same sort of rules as we talk about on the farm. You want to think about where you walk, how you're interacting, being careful of all the species that live there. I think it's important to say thank you. So I'm a dork and I literally say thank you to the nettles as I'm harvesting them just to send them some positive vibes. But another way you can say thank you is to go back in the summer when something like nettles is going to seed and help them spread their seed by just shaking the plants a little bit, getting some of those seeds off. You can even take some off and spread them around that patch. So that's a way to say thank you. You helped me eat earlier in the season, so I'm going to help you reproduce now. So Nettle, Erotica, Dioicia is a super cool plant. It's got just so many different uses, and I can't spend a ton of time going into them today, but I want to highlight a couple really neat ones. And first of all, the uses of this plant. This is knowledge that comes from our traditional and indigenous communities that are still using this plant and coming up with incredible uses for it today. So the Coast Salish peoples in our region use this plant as food, as medicine, clothing, fiber, and a building material. So we can eat the leaves, which I'll show you a little bit later. As a medicine, nettles helps with seasonal allergies. It's also can be ground up and used to help clot blood. If you had a if you were bleeding, you could put some ground nettles on your wound and it'll help stop the bleeding, which is pretty cool. It's also good for reducing inflammation. Um, One thing you might not expect is that nettles were used and are used to create clothing. So this little picture on the right here, that is some nettle rope. So the stem of the nettles can be pulled apart and then woven into a rope, which is used to make clothing as well as fiber and as a building material. So you could actually say, create this rope and then hold up a tarp or like a skin or some other thing to create a shelter. So pretty awesome that the stem of that plant can be that strong. And again, there are thousands of different uses. Indigenous communities have been using this plant basically as long as before our written history even started. So, in terms of nutritional benefits, nettle is a powerhouse. It is a superfood. It has vitamins, minerals, fats, all the amino acids we need, a ton of different pigments. As with many wild forage foods, it is actually much more nutritious than any vegetable we could grow or find in the grocery store because most wild plants are still competing through evolution, sort of for space. So they have to become really good at harvesting nutrients to keep themselves growing. Again, with sort of medicinal benefits we can access pretty easily. Just eating a little bit of nettles every week is great for helping your seasonal allergies as we move into pollen season here. Um, I have tendonitis, which is basically my nerves in my hand just get inflamed and hurt a lot from an old injury. Eating nettles and actually stinging myself purposely on the wrist helps reduce my inflammation, gets my blood flowing, and feels really good. So nettles are used both in traditional and Western medicine to reduce inflammation. So finding this plant, nettles likes to grow in evergreen and deciduous forest, meaning forest with trees that are green all year and don't drop their leaves, and in forests that drop their leaves. So they do like most moist soils, which most forest soils are in our area, and they're often found in disturbed areas, which is kind of helpful for us. So along the side of trails, along the side of paths, along trails that other animals make, and often you'll see them along roads as well. Although you might not want to take the ones along roads because most likely they have some particulates like some gasoline residue, especially if it's like a heavily trafficked road. Nettles do like full sun, so where you're often going to find them if you're walking in a forest, if you come to sort of a clearing or a meadow, it's likely you might find some nettles in that space. So as you're walking along, like look for those openings in the forest canopy, and if you're specifically looking for nettles, that might be a way to head to try to find some. Um, Although they like full sun, you will also find them in shaded areas. They're really well adapted and can grow really well lots of places. In terms of plant propagation, they spread well by seed. So if you find one, it's likely that you're going to find a bunch of them all around that area because there will be a plant that might have got moved in by a bird or an insect or some other species that picked up a seed and dropped it. It started to grow, and every year that plant and all its offspring are starting to reproduce, and they just sort of spread out that way.
So, we think of stinging nettle as something that hurts us, but it's actually a really tasty edible plant. And you do need gloves to harvest it. Here I am, all gloved up, ready to go. But, super, super tasty. So, first let's talk about taxonomy and identification here. So, this is Eureka eroica here. So, it is similar to the mint species of plant. And what we're looking for, we got a couple identification characteristics. It has an alternate leaf pattern, which you can kind of really see clearly from above. Those leaves coming off at the nodes and sort of every other spot here. The leaves themselves are that sort of rhomboid shape with a really, really clear serrate edge. They're a little crinkly. And they've got, let's see if we can get this on camera here. They've got little hairs, which you can see really clearly on the stem, and that is what actually stings you. Now, what's kind of interesting is, let's flip this around. So the stingers of stinging nettle are actually, what you're getting is an acid burn. There's two things that are happening. There's a histamine that comes out of the plant, and then there's a couple various acids. So what's actually happening is it's inflaming your skin. So you're not actually getting like stabbed or poked as much as you're getting a little acid burn, which sounds kind of unpleasant, but just getting a little bit on your fingers and hands isn't so bad. It's where you accidentally walk through a nettle patch where things get a little rough. So when you're harvesting, you can wear gloves, and I'll show you this in a minute, but we're basically just going to snip the plants above a node and keep the leaves and the stem. Both are what's really tasty and delicious. So when we're harvesting nettles, we want to look for generally smaller plants. This one's a little bit bigger, but it'll be good for demonstration purposes. So as with our other vegetables, the best and tastiest parts are going to be the smaller, newer growth. So we're looking specifically at the top growth here and like these first couple sets of leaves. We also never want to harvest the whole plant when we're wild foraging because we want to make sure it can still reproduce. So all these little axial buds around the nodes here, you can kind of see those here. Those are going to become flowers and then seeds and then reproduce and spread this little nettle patch we have here around. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take my scissors and cut a little bit above the node, snip that. If I had two hands right now, I would have grabbed that, but there we have a nice little piece of nettle ready to go in a bag and ready to eat later. So A good foraging rule is if you only find one plant, you want to leave that plant to make sure it can survive and reproduce. But here, we're thinking about sort of habitat and ecology. Nettle primarily spreads from seed, and here we have this nice little nettle patch. And the habitat nettle likes, it likes wet soils, it likes open sun, and it likes disturbed areas. So often if you're hiking in any sort of woods in our area, you'll find nettle growing along the side of streams, growing along the side of trails. And if you find one, you're probably going to find more. There's usually a little patch wherever you go. So that's nettle harvesting for you. We'll show you how to cook these things too, because there's a little preparation. You don't want to eat them raw. You will get stung in your mouth. Not a good time. But I'll show you how to steam them and then chop them up. You can use them like spinach and also make things like pesto out of them. So let's say you're walking through the woods and you get stung by stinging nettle, or you sting yourself while you're harvesting. So what's kind of cool is there's a couple plants that can actually alleviate your sting and sort of heal it a bit. So I've stung myself here as a demonstration. It's going to be a little hard to see, but right sort of where my watch line is, I stung myself on purpose. You can kind of see it's getting red, it's getting a little bit swollen. You can see those like acid burny bumps starting to form. So it stings a little bit. It's really not so bad. It's actually good for people with arthritis. You can make nettle sauerkraut and sting yourself on purpose. Lots of fun. But what you want to look for is a fern. So I've got some ferns here. These are sword ferns. The same times nettles are out, ferns are sporing. So if you look underneath our fern here, we got lots of little spores everywhere. And these spores are extremely alkaline. So if we mix acid from the nettle sting with alkaline on our fern leaves here, it's actually going to sort of negate the sting and make you feel better. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So obviously that was an amazing camera shot, but oh yeah, you can really see the stings now. But rubbing ferns on your sting will make your sting go away. So that's a fun, if you sting yourself while you're hiking or you sting yourself while you're out in the woods, that's a great trick to make your stings feel better.
So hopefully you enjoyed this video. I had sort of two goals here. One was to give you something hopefully kind of interesting to learn about, and maybe you want to go harvest some stinging nettles now, which would be super cool. But going to the woods would also be a great way to complete your plant growth analysis assignment if you have not done that yet. So I will note that although Pierce County parks are closed, trails are still open. Trailhead parking is just closed. So Orange Gate is a great place to go. There's Spanaway Lake. There's some trails at Spanaway Lake, I believe. So there are some places in which you can get outside. Might be able to find something tasty to eat, and you could complete some assignments as well. So just make sure if you are going outside that you are maintaining that social distancing, staying 6 feet apart. So have fun. I'll hopefully see and check in with you all soon.